Yeah, in the world too. I mean, Morgan, you know, you're a Republican strategist. What would you be telling people in the White House to do? Some people think this is, very few, think this is somehow a great policy where Trump can put huge amounts of pressure, the madman theory, while the big boys like the Defense Secretary and others push for maximum leverage. Is that what they're doing?
Well, I actually do think that is part of it. I think everyone now understands that there are two separate and distinct policy arms in the White House. There is the Twitter arm.
That's really worrying, isn't it? Because if you're the North Koreans, if you're in Pyongyang, which one do you listen to?
Well, I think the trick is to listen to Secretary Mattis.
But he doesn't have his finger on the button.
Well, no. Wait, so you think that President Trump would literally nuke North Korea? The button, meaning the button of nuclear.
Well, he said, I mean, let's face it, he said, we will totally destroy North Korea. I mean, that's from the podium, from the rostrum of the United Nations. I mean, if you're North Korea and you are totally destroyed between 1950 and 53, and the President of the United States, overseeing the most powerful military machine in the world, says, hey, we're ready to do it again, you have to think about that in a serious way. You can't think, oh, this is just a guy talking because he does this.
Okay, if it makes you feel any better, I could tell you that President Trump isn't going to press a button and nuke Pyongyang. It's just not going to happen. And I'm pretty sure North Korea knows that as well.
Because we don't really know that.
Let Morgan finish his point, but you were saying we should trust
Secretary Mattis and the Department of Defense. There will not be a preemptive nuclear strike by this president. That's hyperbole. That's looking for something to be scared about. There's plenty of things to be scared about in real life. There's too much stuff to be scared about. This is not one of them.
But I just have to say, wars don't always start because somebody says, let's have a nuclear bomb.
No, you're absolutely right. They escalate.
You climb the escalation ladder, the other side climbs the escalation ladder, things become very tense, both sides are worried, one side may be even more worried, and then somebody makes a move. And that's how wars start. I mean, we have gone through numerous major military confrontations, including 2 world wars. They weren't really thought out. They were, I would say, madness. But one thing leads to another.
Yeah, I want to bring in Ray Baker. He's a journalist and political analyst from Washington, D.C. He's in our newsroom. Ray, what do you make of the standoff? Are we going to see a misunderstanding, a spiral of escalation if things don't calm down, do you think?
Yeah, so I think it's absolutely possible that these things can happen. I also do think that it's hyperbole that the President of the United States regularly threatens nuclear war with another country. But if you understand the psychology of that other country, as we've already heard some of our panelists say, when folks have had 3 years of bombing from this nation and it's recurring in their memory, whether this comes in their memory time and time again through state-issued propaganda or whatever types of messaging that Pyongyang is giving to the people and the citizens of that nation, that's familiar to them. So they're not necessarily interested in waiting to see or understanding the hyperbole that President Trump speaks with. Furthermore, we've had countless United States presidents who have used their words to flex the military might of the United States and their armed forces, yet President Trump lacks a particular nuance that allows us to say this is what we're capable of doing. However, this is not what we're interested in doing. And time again, as one of the Republican strategists himself said, time and time again, we're seeing even the president be bipolar in the types of decisions and statements he makes either through podium speeches or through, as some of our pop culture friends would call it, their Twitter fingers.
Okay, I want to move on to other topics, but Simon, just a last word. You do a lot of reporting to Asia. We do, obviously, too. Trump's going to the region in about a month. I got a sense from United Nations this week that the allies and competitors in the region are equally worried.
Oh, absolutely. I just got back, as it happens, from Singapore, Beijing and New Delhi. I've been on the road for the last several days. And, you know, there is a real problem with what Morgan is suggesting for allies, treaty allies in the region and competitors and geopolitical challenges in the region, because they look at the situation here and they say, well, hang on a second. Up until now, the buck has always stopped at the Oval Office desk with the President of the United States. And now we have to put our faith in the generals. General John Kelly, who had his head in his hands at the UN last week when President Trump was threatening to destroy North Korea. H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor. General James Mattis, the Defense Secretary. 3 men whose own future in government is by no means guaranteed. So if you're one of those foreign countries that President Trump is planning to visit, you're going to be getting all sorts of quizzical questions about who's in charge.
I think that's a good place to leave it. There's still a lot of answer questions. Sorry, we've got so many topics, but I am going to give you the first word on the next on the next topic, Morgan. I promise you. Let's go to the hurricanes, because we've seen devastation across not just the Caribbean, but we've seen two mainland U.S. states. But I want to talk about a U.S. territory of Puerto Rico. For those of us who were here during Hurricane Katrina and saw the federal response to that. Now, history doesn't repeat itself, but sometimes it rhymes. Is it rhyming now?
There's a hint of it. I think we all woke up and realized how bad Puerto Rico had it. I think we went through a day and a half, and it wasn't talked about too much, not enough. And there is some blame to go around, I think, on all sides of that. And I think now we're all realizing just how troubled that island is. And I think that if we don't take steps pretty aggressively here to get things in the right direction, there's going to be whispers of that. I do think the response to the American states of Florida and Texas have been outstanding relative to every other past president in the modern era. But I think that the Puerto Rico situation is lacking, and there needs to be an aggressive move forward to get it going in the right direction.
Brian, one fact that I saw out there was most Americans didn't realize that Puerto Ricans were American citizens till this week. Is that part of it?
Well, yes, Puerto Rico is a colony. It's been colonized. The U.S. invaded the island, kept the island as part of also the effort to colonize, and they did colonize Cuba and the Philippines. That was part of the United States' push to Asia eventually. Puerto Rico is under the control and the authority of the U.S. Congress. Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens. Puerto Ricans fight in U.S. wars. Puerto Ricans, in large numbers, are in the U.S. military. Puerto Ricans don't have any right to vote for the President of the United States. They don't have a voting person in Congress. They are settled with the Jones Act, which means that no ship can come into a Puerto Rican port
without the waiver,
unless it goes to an American port first. In other words, America has maintained a monopoly on trade. That makes goods in Puerto Rico very expensive. Puerto Rico has not only been colonized, but it's been even all the minimal democratic power it had has been taken away by the Emergency Financial Management Board. And so now you have the President of the United States saying, oh, it's sad, but you have to pay your debt. This is not really the debt of the Puerto Rican people. The United States government, by the way, much of the debt is illegal and held by hedge funds in Wall Street.
That's right, there was a big hedge fund crisis
a big hedge
last
fund,
year.
Like, this is the moment that the U.S. president should say, there's a moratorium on payment of that debt. All the money that's going to Puerto Rico must be to meet the needs of the people, not to pay interest payments to Wall Street banks and hedge funds.
Ray Becker, can I bring you in here? Obviously, the disaster is unfolding in real time, and the electricity looks like it's going to be off for a long while. The infrastructure, as Brian hinted, because of the financial crisis, is subpar. The president tweeted that they're going to help, but also gave a nod to what Brian was saying, that Wall Street had to get it sliced too. Is this a message that may backfire?
It should backfire if folks are concerned for the welfare of our fellow Americans, the Puerto Ricans down there. And I would push back a little bit on what Morgan said about the ignorance that American citizens had to how drastic the situation was. Van Newkirk of The Atlantic had done some important and impactful reporting about just how devastating that situation was, the infrastructural nature of Puerto Rico. This is before any type of any type of natural disasters were to hit the island that would be problematic. It was simply the way of life and the governance and the administration of the governance because of the colonization of that place. And so his documentation of that should let us know and cue us in that there were not the structures and barriers in place, that if some natural disaster, some god-awful catastrophic thing happened, that we would be able to respond to it. And Americans, by and large, turned their heads. Unfortunately, time and time again, one makes the argument that when things happen to black and brown people in the United States, Americans, by and large, are turning their head. We have to ask the question, why does this happen in this way?
I always see Cuba's response to these, and I'm always quite amazed. I've got to move on to other topics because we've got so much still to talk about. Travel ban 3.0. We've got less countries on the list that are Muslim, but more countries on the list that aren't. And we also had Obamacare surviving again because healthcare, the third time, the Congress have tried to push through a repeal and some sort of reform. That's failed as well. Simon, you cover Washington. How are you explaining these two to the world this week?
Well, with the issue of the travel ban, I mean, frankly, it's laughable, isn't it? I mean, in a bid to try and demonstrate to the world that the travel ban is not anti-Muslim, they've now lumped Venezuela and North Korea in on the list. They might as well have put Antarctica on the list at this point. I mean, the message that it sends, by the way, about North Korea is astonishing. I mean, first of all, the North Korean people can't get out, so they can't get to John F. Kennedy Airport to apply for refuge in the United States. And if they did, why exactly are we closing the door in their faces at this point as part and parcel of a move that the White House says proves that the travel ban isn't a Muslim ban? I mean, it was clearly a Machiavellian move by the White House, sensing that their legal case was in big trouble at the Supreme Court.
And that legal case seems to have actually been withdrawn for reflection by all sides. Morgan, can you weigh in on the other side of this on healthcare? Because you know, repeal and replace was not just Donald Trump, it was every Republican who ran in the 2016 election, and they just can't get it over the line. What's going on?
Yeah, listen, it's a big failure.
Sorry, carry on.
No, go ahead.
No, go on.
No, I think it's hard to find any other explanation except the fact that the Republican Congress, specifically the Senate Republicans, have pretty much completely failed in all of their rhetoric that they said in the past, like you said, 4, 6, 8 years. And now they have a chance to really do it, and they didn't. Senator John McCain, who is an American hero and has done so much great things for this country, basically did exactly the opposite of what he campaigned when he ran for re-election in the last 2 cycles, at least the last Senate cycle. And other Senate Republicans have as well. So it's hard to argue that it wasn't a failure.
Okay, we've got to move on. I just want to ask Brian quickly, do you think this gives a chance, because I don't want to get in the details of all this legislation, because it's quite messy and no one really understands it, including the Republican senators who were going to vote for it. But do you think this gives a chance for bipartisanship in US politics, Republicans and Democrats coming together?
Possibly, but let's go back to when Medicare was adopted in 1964. The Republicans went in a full-court press, a filibuster to try to stop it. We have 20 senators who have signed on with Bernie Sanders for the single-payer health care plan. Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, could morph into a single-payer or a semi-single-payer plan. If the Republicans are smart, I think they did themselves a big favor by not passing it, because why take away health care from 20 million people and then expect they're going to vote for you?
Ray Baker, let's go on to the last controversy of the week. There's been so many. This NFL thing. I didn't quite understand it to begin with as an outsider, but football players, American football players, would go on a knee to protest police brutality, and then we heard this from Donald Trump. I didn't even know this was a thing until I heard this.
Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, get that son of a off the field right now, out, he's fired. He's fired!
So it's them on the knee during the anthem, disrespecting flag, because you're meant to stand up, hand on heart. Can you explain to an international audience what's going on here?
Yes, by and large, as you alluded to in the beginning, NFL players who wanted to object and protest the racial brutality, the police brutality, and racial oppression of African Americans in the United States decided to air that protest during the playing of the national anthem before their pro football games. Since then, that controversy and conversation has been co-opted and turned into an idea that somehow these players are disrespecting the flag, the anthem, and/or the United States Armed Forces. By having the conversation there, we no longer talk about the police brutality that the initial player, Colin Kaepernick, and Eric Reed, his teammates, and Eli Harold were protesting. And it's interesting that that President Trump's comments came on the same week that the St. Louis city in the United States was facing protests in the streets because a police officer shot and killed an African American who they found a gun on after the police officer said he was going to shoot him, and the only DNA on that gun belonged to the officer who shot him. And this is the same city, St. Louis, that is not far from where many international viewers recognize the name Ferguson, Missouri, which in 2014, Officer Darren Wilson shot and killed the unarmed teen Michael Brown.
Thanks for that. Simon, what do you make of this? Where's the president going with this?
It's classic diversion, Nathan. It's classic diversion by Donald Trump, who, by the way, was described in the Washington Post today by the former chief speechwriter for George W. Bush, so no shrinking violet, as a racial demagogue inside the White House. It's classic diversion because he knows that he's got trouble with his base. He can't get Obamacare repealed and reformed. He's about to lose, we think, in Alabama tonight because he's backed the losing horse in a Republican primary there. We'll see what happens when those results come in. That demonstrates he's got less juice with his base than he has before, and so he suddenly decided extemporaneously in that speech in Alabama last Friday to open up a new line of attack on this NFL issue. It's absolutely designed to say to his base, I'm diverting your attention away from these problems, look over here instead.
Morgan Muchnick is the sole Republican here, the strategist.
It's becoming very obvious, yes, but I enjoy it. So just very quickly, and I actually agree with the other guest, the gentleman who's in the other room, about how the movement was co-opted.
Sure.
It is now, the country, it's about a cultural war. The country, who wants to be on the side of not respecting the flag? Now, all of a sudden, these people that were protesting are now becoming the face of a movement that purposefully kneels during the national anthem and the flag. Regardless of the origins of the movement, that is now the case. This is why Donald Trump has absolutely won the messaging yet again. It's because now he's on the side culturally of against people protesting the flag. And he's won, and the NFL just falls into it, so obviously.
Well, we're going to have to pick this up at a later date because we have run out of time and topics. That's it. Thanks so much to our panel, a great panel. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Nathan King in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for being with us.